Okay, welcome back to the Locker Room podcast. I know we have a running joke about myself and Joel Coulter, normally the co-host, getting kicked off the podcast and coming in and out for sessions. But today we've kicked the gaffer off. So Kieran's not with us today. It's myself and Ben Smalley who's going to co-host with me today. Ben's the sports scientist at DSS and sports scientist at QPR Academy. So Ben, thanks for coming on for this podcast.
Yeah, good to be on, Ross. Looking forward to it. Should be a good chat.
Should be a really good chat. And no further ado, we've got a massive guest on today, someone that I was desperate to bring on and only took me 2 weeks to track him down, which is a record. So we've got Ben Bradley, who Head of Academy Sports Science and Medicine at Bournemouth. And we've had a little bit of discussion back and forth just in terms of our job roles. But Ben, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us today, mate.
No problem, Ross. Pleasure to be on. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Before we get into it, guys, I must say a massive shout out to our sponsor, www.rypt.app. That's RYPT, all capital letters, who are sponsoring the podcast for at least a month, and they're coming in collaboration with Dealey Sports Science here. And I'll go to you, Ben, in a little bit because you can discuss a little bit about the project that you're doing with them. But essentially, they're a platform that connects coaches with either clients or different athletes, and you can put programs into an app that clients can go in and see. There's video demonstrations there. It's a very, very good software that we've had to play around with DSS, and we're getting on board with them a bit more. You can put technical models on there and stuff. You can get feedback around RPEs and volume loads and client subjective feedback as well. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about the project that's coming up in terms of the online training stuff that you're going to do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, it's a fantastic piece of software. Again, doesn't really leave any stones unturned. Covers all bases. And we're basically going to be putting together a project where we can do some online coaching. So that will be encompassing one-to-ones, individuals, all through this app. So we're going to be hosting a webinar series next week. So link into that. And that will be, Cormac will be presenting on the app and going through that. And we'll present on our work for that when that comes around.
Great stuff, very exciting. And for all those that want to head over to the website, dealeysportscience.com, there's an offer that the guys at Rypt.app are putting on there, a couple of months free, I think. Check it out on the website and check out their app and have a look at their services. Cormac and the guys are doing a great job. Just on that, Benny, it might be, by the time we release this, it might have already gone the webinar. So yeah, just so we know. But yeah, great webinar there from Cormac and the guys. Okay, let's get into this exciting stuff. So we brought his guest on and want to pick his brain as much as we can. Ben, just for the listeners, because some of them might not have heard you on the Football Fitness Federation podcast recently, which we listened to, and it was fantastic, by the way. Do you want to just give a brief update of kind of where you got to where you are now and just a bit of a career history?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Yeah, to be fair, not a great deal to say. I've spent my career working in football. Haven't really ventured out, something that I potentially would like to do in the future. But yeah, in terms of my career, I've been in football the whole time. We wind back to the start of my education, I guess, was doing a sport and exercise science degree at Kingston University, 2010 to 2013, which was great. I think I went a little bit late. I was a mature student, so I went there at sort of 23 years old when I knew exactly what I wanted to do with myself and where I wanted to go. So I was really focused, which really helped me out. And I look back and think that was the right thing to do now. Got an internship at Crawley Town in my final year, so did that. That was really important for me to sort of get sort of a bit of knowledge on how applied sport works, how football works, and to decide whether I wanted to delve into that industry. And for me, that was a really nice learning curve to get hands on with the players, get hands on with the staff, and see how that was. And that was a really fantastic year for me. Post that, I was looking for jobs in the summer. Obviously, I'd left that role, had left university, managed to stumble across a role at AFC Bournemouth, which at the time was a sort of an intern role or sort of an introductory role, if you like, in the academy. So the sports science department hadn't been there before, and they were sort of trying to delve into that. So the role I went down for was a year's contract, which was sort of, it was a paid one, sort of minimally paid one. Again, like I say, just for them to sort of dip their toes into sports science and academies and see if it's something I wanted to progress with in the future. Luckily for me, I obviously made a decent enough impression, and they decided to offer me a full-time contract a few months into that, which was perfect for me. So I moved from my hometown of Brighton down to Bournemouth. And that was, like I say, 2013, just coming into 2014 when they gave me that contract. And we've made lots of changes since then. The department's grown and the academy's grown massively since then, and moved on year, as the club itself. So really pleased with the way it's gone. I'm really pleased with how the club and the academy is developing still. And along the way, I've picked up my master's degree as well. 2015-16, I did an MSc in Applied Sports Science, distance learning at Worcester, because I was obviously working at the time. And I guess since I've been there and sort of 6-7 years now, I've been there, the role itself has sort of evolved into the sort of head of sports science and medicine role, or head of elite performance role, whatever you want to call it these days, where, you know, I've sort of got a team to oversee and sort of a strategy to put together, and a framework for us to follow as a team, in order for us to be successful and deliver the sort of aims and the vision of the club and the academy. And essentially that's to bring players through the system, keep them as long as we can, and try and get them into the first team. If we can't do that, can we get them in, you know, football league clubs or national league clubs, or as high as they can go? So yeah, that's where I am now. Not a glamorous journey like some people have, going here and there and doing all sorts of different stuff, but that's the way it's gone for me, and I'm happy now where I am, and happy to keep developing and keep learning, and hopefully keep progressing the department I'm working in.
Thanks, Ben. And just to give the listeners a little context to where you are, listen, I've studied you, and I'm sure anyone who's looked at you on social media and the department has always seen that Bournemouth are leading the way in certain aspects, but you're in quite a unique position. Your first team are in the Premier League, but the academy are currently at Cat 3, and you've been at Cat 3 for a while. Do you want to maybe just give the listeners a little bit of info around that, in terms of maybe difficulties you've had implementing a certain program, and also maybe the benefits of that as well, being where you are as academy?
Yeah, I mean, the club and the academy have tried to progress the status of the academy up to sort of at least category 2 for quite a few years now. It's always been an ambition of our academy manager and of the club to push that category status up to where it needs to be. In terms of our facilities, that's probably held us back. One of the main rules for category 2 status is having an indoor artificial pitch, indoor 3G or 4G pitch, which we currently don't have. And unfortunately for us, there's not one in the area close enough for us to use for it to qualify, as a lot of clubs have done in the past, to sort of work their way around those rules. So for us, it hasn't been that easy, but something that I'm really proud of, and something that the club's done fantastically, is they haven't sort of stopped and said, right, well, we're Cat 3, we can't push to Cat 2 for these specific reasons. We're just going to sort of plod along where we are. The academy and the staff in it have always said, no matter where we are and what category status we are, we can still try and do the best we can be, which is why people like myself are still at the club and still trying to move things forward, because we know that the back is there, and people still have that ambition. So like I say, from where I started to where I am now, the academy is completely different regardless of the category status. So our staff levels have gone, you know, through the roof in terms of a Cat 3. I would suggest we meet the Cat 2 levels of staffing without too much trouble, in terms of coaching especially. All our age groups have got full-time coaches as well as assistant coaches. Our sports science and medicine department's grown hugely since I started. When I first came, obviously myself in the role I was in when I first joined, we had a senior physio full-time, a part-time analyst, and we've gone on to the sort of team we've got now, which again isn't sort of a Cat 1 size sports science and medicine team, but there's 2 of us sports scientists full time, an S&C coach part time. We've got 3 full times physios or sports therapists. We have our lead performance analyst who's full time, as well as a part time analyst as well. So these roles we're building on season by season, year by year, and we supplement that as well with our psychology PhD student, analyst MSc student, and, you know, our sandwich year students as well, where we feel that the gaps are and the need is for those guys, and where we can provide them with sort of development opportunities. So yeah, in terms of the category status, it hasn't held us back in that sense. Obviously, everyone wants to provide their players with the best opportunities to learn, so we try and mix our games program up as much as we can. So we appreciate our Cat 3 games program for what it is. There's definitely still challenging games in there. There's definitely some real good work being done at other Cat 3s for sure that I've seen, and some real competitive games that we have, which is great. And we also try and supplement that with getting our players into sort of Cat 2 friendlies, Cat 1 friendlies, even grassroots friendlies. For us, it's about, giving the players a variety. So if we can try and mix and match our games program across the season, then for us that's the real bonus. So if we can we've already got the Cat 3 games penciled in. If we can add Cat 2s, Cat 1s, grassroots, any sort of foreign sort of tours and teams that we can add in there as well. If we can get our bio-banded games going and our year of birth games going as well, we're sort of trying to tick all those boxes and hit all those different challenges for our players. So I feel like, yes, we want to move up category status. Yes, that's definitely an aim, definitely something that we're looking to do as soon as possible. But I do feel like we try and make the most of what we've got. And I do feel like we do a decent job of giving the players varied experiences, which in the long term will hopefully help their development.
Yeah, for sure. No, from the outside, it definitely looks like you're providing a great service. And we'll talk about the bio-band in a bit later, because that's probably not what you're known for, but there's only a select amount of clubs that are maybe doing it regularly, and you guys are definitely one of them. Just talking about your games program there, very interesting. Do you feel that when you play against a mixture of teams, so the Cat 1s and Cat 2s, a lot of the Cat 1s and Cat 2s might only play against each other? They might not experience Cat 3s, including us probably. We probably don't have enough games against Cat 3s. Do you think that provides the physical tests sometimes and challenges against playing against more direct football at times that you might not get in the Cat 1 and Cat 2 programs?
For sure. The Cat 1 games that we play especially are completely different to our Cat 3 games. Just the different styles that certain teams play. A lot of the Cat 1 teams obviously play a similar way. We play, like I say, we played a lot of Cat 1 friendlies, especially, I would say, probably in the last 3 years. We've tried to play as many Cat 1 friendlies as we can. We've played, the big teams quite a lot. We played Chelsea quite frequently. We played Arsenal. We played Spurs quite a bit. We played Reading quite a bit. All the Cat 1s that are sort of within a decent reach of us, Southampton, Brighton. And the football's great. They've got some fantastic players, fantastic facilities. It's great for our boys to go there to see the sort of level where they want to aim to be. And they do provide different. In terms of the way we play, we probably play a little bit more like the Cat 1s than the Cat 3 teams in terms of the way we play out from the back, in terms of the way we like to use the thirds of the pitch and play a progressive sort of game. But I also feel like we probably have that little bit of extra energy when it comes to pressing that potentially Cat 1s sometimes do, sometimes don't have. So we'll try and play out from the back and do all those things, and we'll also try and work a high press as well. And we'll go in, put teams under pressure, and they maybe don't expect that from us. If they haven't played us before, they don't play us regularly. So what we do is ask a lot of our players. We expect them to be ready to play out from the back time and time again, no matter how many mistakes we make, if we do make mistakes. And we also expect them to go and press time after time. So it's a real good challenge for me from a physical perspective, trying to get our players conditioned and ready for that. And the Cat 3 games program, again, like I say, the Cat 3 games program is great as well, because you do get teams that want to play football as well. But like you alluded to, you get quite a few teams that like to play a bit more direct and work to their strengths again, which is something that our players are going to come up against in their career. So we feel like there's a great balance for us in the games program we provide. And sometimes the Cat 3 games are a bit more direct, and sometimes they're a bit more cut and thrust, and they can get a bit feisty at times. But as can any game, even with the Cat 1s, it depends how the game's going. But like I say, there's some really good Cat 3 teams that are doing some really good work. They don't all play long football. It's a bit of a mixture. But we can also get the different side of the game, the more technical side, I would say, from the sort of Cat 1 players that are looking to sort of break into the Cat 1 under 23s and first teams, for example, that might have potentially have a higher technical ability. But when you look at the Cat 3s, I guess they're trying to get in their teams. A lot of the Cat 3s are League 1, League 2 first teams, so they're working towards what the first team manager wants, and looking to try and get their players into their first team on Saturday or Tuesday night. So we respect that massively. And a lot of the players in the Cat 3 games programs don't have under 23 squads as well above their 18s, for example. So they're a lot closer to the first teams, and a lot of the Cat 3 players we play against have had first team exposure. So again, that's really, really nice benefit for us playing against them. You know, when they've already played, you know, a few League One games, League Two games, even conference games maybe. But having that senior football under their belt gives them that experience. It's nice for our boys to play against them as well. Like I say, the important thing for us is varying the challenge and varying the program. I feel like even if we were a Cat 1, we would be looking for Cat 3 games to try and get that varied experience as well across the board. So I think there's benefits from playing across categories, and like your original question alluded to, I think it would benefit Cat 2s and Cat 1s to play Cat 3 games as well if they're not doing that.
For sure. No, some great info in there. And I think the variation in the program is key. I mean, we have to face realities. A lot of the players that we're working with, the small percentage of those might get into the first team. The majority of them are either going to play lower league or League One, League Two, or maybe even non-league football. So sometimes not playing to get across the categories might be ill preparing them for the realities of football.
Yeah, so I would agree, Ross. I would agree. And especially a lot of our boys as well, we try and get loan experiences for them as well, sort of local loan experiences, just to try and get them into men's football. So there's a pretty good non-league scene around where we are in terms of, you know, Conference South sort of standard, Southern Prem standard, that sort of level. And it's really good for our, you know, if we're looking at probably our second year scholars, maybe even our first year pros, to go out and play men's football, which is obviously different from your under 18s and your under 21 or under 23 games that you get. So just again, adding that variety of experiences is pivotal for their development in the future. Because like you say, some of them might end up there, and you know, the football's completely different from the academy level.
For sure. Just on that then, Ben, really interesting. How do you find managing them loan players then? Like from especially the part-time loans, because they're going to be training with their clubs 2 times a week, and then with you guys, but they might not fit into the 23 schedule, for example. They might be playing on a Saturday. How do you find that management process with those individuals?
Yeah, it's a bit more of a difficult one, especially if they're at, like I just mentioned, sort of non-league clubs. So we try and have as much dialogue with them as we can to try and see what they're doing. Obviously, like you mentioned, the part-time ones they generally train with us. They might train once a week maybe with the team that they're on loan at, and obviously they'll play Saturday and Tuesday night, depending on their schedule. But obviously, it's all down to individualising their programmes to make sure we've got a schedule for them. We know what they've got upcoming. We know when their games are. We know what they can and can't do on a daily basis, when their recovery sessions are. So it's part of our programme anyway, especially at the top end. We're looking at 18 to 23 to make sure we individualise each player's programme. And that's just another layer on top of that. So if we've got an under 18, for example, that's got a Saturday, Tuesday, obviously they'll have Sunday off. They'll come in and do their recovery work on a Monday and probably some technical work. Have their game on the Tuesday. Depending on the match minutes they've had on the Tuesday and where they've been, depending if they've been home or away, and what time they've got home, bits and pieces like that, we'll get them back in the next day again for some recovery. They'll probably do some gym work, depending on what they've done minutes wise the night before, potentially some sort of upper body session or flush session, something like that. For the 18s, they have their education on a Thursday with us anyway, and then they'll be in game prep on Friday, whether they're playing with us or playing with the loan team. So yeah, it's just a case of individualising that programme across the week for each player. It's as simple as that, really, in terms of just making sure we know we've got their schedule, we know where they are, what they're doing, what match minutes they've done. We communicate with them, and they tell us how they're feeling in terms of their subjective scores and wellness and bits and pieces. And like I said, just add another layer onto the individualisation of the programme. So yeah, definitely something to think about on top of everything else.
Yeah, another layer, layer added on. So a lot of people might look at that and go, well, actually, like they haven't got any room for some real overloaded training in that week. They're just recovering game to game. But when they're at that level playing senior football, that's their development then, isn't it? Like the other stuff kind of takes a little bit of a sideways hit for that period, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah, completely agree. If they're playing Saturday, Tuesday non-league, and bear in mind that the players they're playing with might be playing for, a bit of money, a win bonus that might, go towards their mortgage or towards paying for their kids, you know what I mean? Something like that. So the really important thing one of the really important things we feel for the players that go out at that sort of level is they realise the importance of it, and they realise how important winning is, and you've got to be ready to play Saturday, Tuesday. And you're right, the real physical development might go out the window for a certain period of time if they've got a Saturday, Tuesday in terms of their S&C program and developing that lower body strength and stuff like that. But we've also got to consider building that game robustness and being able to play them Saturday, Tuesday, and making sure they're resistant to injury across that. And I think even with some of our players that don't go out on loan, we try and book in periods where we're overloaded with games to try and get them playing Saturday, Tuesday. Because yes, training is fantastic, and we love having 3 weeks to get as much technical, tactical, psych, and obviously physical work into the players as possible, and that's really important at certain periods over the season. But like you mentioned, there's also really important parts of the season where you've got to go out, you've got to perform Saturday, Tuesday. You've got to recover, you've got to manage your body, you've got to learn how that affects you as a player, as a person. Get your nutrition right, get your sleep right, and again, that's all part of the rounded experience of developing a football player, in my opinion.
For sure, great stuff there, Ben. Interesting said about mortgage football. A coach at QPR, Paul Hall, he's the under-23s coach, always talks about that. People in the academy program don't know what it feels like to play mortgage football, where you've got people who, if they lose that game, like they're struggling to live for the next week. And that's a serious nature we're trying to prepare these players for. As much as academies are very friendly places, very nice places, you have to prepare them for that as well, right?
Absolutely. There needs to be a point where players realise, and we're all in the development business. Don't get me wrong, because and me as an advocate for it. That's the word for it. As much as most in terms of development all the way through the academy, and like I spoke about the different varying experiences and stuff like that. But there needs to come. The boys need to get to a level or a point in their development where we go, right now it's time to sort of knuckle down and make sure you can produce. And there's no better environment than some 30-year-old blokes screaming at you, telling you that you need to run and you need to work hard and you need to win because they need a bit of money in their back pocket. So yeah, again, another great experience for the players and their journey from boys to young men.
For sure, Ben. I did say we'd probably digress, but I didn't think we'd digress so much in the first question. So let me get back onto script here on the fight. No, so I listened to your podcast at the Football Fitness Federation, which was very good. And any listeners on here, definitely recommend listening to actually some very good stuff on there. So we're going to delve into a few things that came out of that. And you was massive on this whole integration and having a real integrative approach. And I think that is essential in the way we're working, especially in this modern game. Can you talk a little bit more detail and maybe just give a few specifics around that in terms of day-to-day, what that looks like?
Yeah, so for me, again, I said it on the Football Fitness Federation podcast, and people might have got bored of me saying it, but that the word integration for me is key, and staff working together to create the environment that I've sort of tried to discuss already in terms of that open environment, that challenging environment, and one that's individualised to the player. So essentially, every single person in the academy and all the people I've worked with have got the same sort of goal, no matter what their role is. So we're all working in the academy to benefit the young boys and the young men that we're working with. So we're trying to improve them as football players, as athletes, as people, but for later on in life, whether they're going to go on to be a football player, whether they're going to go on to do whatever, whether they can go on to university, straight out and into a job, whatever it may be. Essentially, we're all on the same path. So whether you're a sports scientist, whether you're working in the education department, whether you're a coach, whether you're recruitment, we're all trying to do the same things essentially. So why would we not work together across the board to ensure that we're all working in a sort of systematic way to get the end goal that we all want anyway? And especially for a club who are obviously putting money into the program to produce players, we need to make sure that we're all joined up, we're all lined up, we're making sure that we're using the best of the resources that we have. So I mentioned we've got a decent coaching department in terms of staff now these days, which is fantastic. But along with that comes more people to speak to, more people that have got different opinions, which is fantastic, but also creates, challenges as well in terms of making sure that we're all on the same page. So if we're, you know, trying to get the same message across, then we need to make sure we've got processes in place to make sure everyone's on the same page. So in terms of sort of multidisciplinary meetings, and when I say multidisciplinary, straight away, obviously, you think of multidisciplines being in the same room together. But what we really want is that sort of integration between everyone, and not, you know, it's sports science turn to speak, it's coaches turn to speak, it's recruitment's turn to speak. It's everyone has a voice, and everyone has a role and a part to play in each part of the academy. So for me, that's fundamental to putting together a program that allows you to develop the players in the best sort of way. And that doesn't matter whether you're a football club, whether you're, you know, any sort of athletic population, any group, or any walk of life really. If you've got the same goal, and you've got people coming at from different angles, then, you know, there's no point in not having joined up right in that sense. And especially if you sit down and speak to people, you'll realise that, you know, everybody's got something to teach you, and essentially you've probably got something to teach them. So in terms of specific examples, the most simple example is prepping for a training session, in my opinion. So we'll sit down and prep for so we've got our week prep potentially, but if we take one session, so if we finish training on a Tuesday and we're in the office in the afternoon and we're going to plan training for the Wednesday, and we make sure we've got, you know, sports sciences involved, the medical department involved, the coach, the coaches that are going to be involved in the session, the goalkeeper coach is there, potentially the academy manager might want to get involved. You know, we've got all these people around who've all got fantastic ideas, and then it's a case of blending those ideas together to get the best as we can out of sort of the four corners, if you want to call it that. So yeah, we'll make sure we sit down. Our training sessions are planned essentially by the coach and the sports science team together, especially at the top end. So if we're looking sort of 15s, 16s, 18s, 23s, you'll have a sports scientist that should be sitting with the coach. You'll have a physio or a sports therapist that should be there as well, at least at some point during that conversation, to advise on injured players and what they can and can't do the next day. The sports scientist and the coach will obviously discuss the physical aspects of the day, what we're sort of looking for, whether it be a strength day, a high-speed running day, a total distance day, obviously the usual stuff you'll hear sports scientists discuss. And it's real fundamental that the coach has a knowledge of that. And we're lucky at AFC Bournemouth that we've got really good coaches that are receptive to what we want to do and how we want to work. I alluded before to the demands of the programme and the playing style that we want to put, or we want to implement into our teams, in terms of, you know, playing out from the back, playing through the thirds, but also a high press, also quick recoveries, quick transitions. So we do need to be physically capable, but we also need to be very technically proficient in what we do. So we need to make sure we've got the right balance of sports science and coaching, and that only comes from having, you know, those systematic processes in place, and us all sitting down together and discussing those things day to day, feeding back on, you know, the GPS reports, making sure the coaches are aware of what that means, and not just producing numbers for the sake of it. So our coaches are really receptive to GPS. They're really receptive to the load markers that we produce, and they're also happy to challenge on those markers and ask us why we think certain things will happen on certain days or should happen on certain days. And that's reciprocal as well, because we can sort of speak to the coach as well and say, look, well, you want to do this drill, we might be able to get better outcomes if we do that drill, if we tweak it like this, like that. And the process is really open, and that's what I really love about the academy I work in. I hear a lot of stories about clubs where it's not like that. Again, I've heard stories about clubs where it is like that as well, and I think that's fantastic. But I would hate to work somewhere where everyone didn't have a voice, and everyone wasn't able to put their sort of opinion and thoughts across, no matter what the outcome of those. But I think being open, being honest, and everyone respecting each other's views. And like I say, we can all learn from each other day to day. There's no doubt in my mind that I've learned a fantastic amount from coaches across my time being a sports scientist, and that has led me to be a better sports scientist. And I like to think that also a lot of coaches have learned from the sports science and medicine department, and that has allowed them to be better coaches as well. So we're all trying to develop, and like I say, it comes back to that initial sort of vision, which is obviously to improve the players and try and get players as far through the academy as they can, and ideally into the first team, and if not to other football league clubs if possible.
Some great stuff there, Ben. Thank you very much. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about multidisciplinary. The psychologist at QPR says it's not multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, because
100%.
Sometimes you can see people working in silo. I'm just thinking of the audience here, Ben. So we'll have some GA coaches, probably quite a lot of GA coaches. We'll have football coaches and we'll have sports scientists, so quite a broad range. And I think it's important because, like you said, the style that Bournemouth like to play with, your particular club and their philosophy, is pressing high, loads of energy. Now, automatically, a sports scientist will be like, well, actually, I need to get them really fit, and here's my processes to do that, and I need to make them to be able to be fast and tolerate high-speed running, axle details, etc. But the isolated work that you would do would have such a small percentage on actually the intensity driven in the specific football drills. So working together is actually going to get so much more better outcomes than working in silo, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ross. One of the really, really positive things that I like about this club is that essentially the intensity comes from the coaches. So especially if I'm talking sort of PDP and above, and that again comes from the first team manager. So Eddie Howe, the intensity he coaches with, the intensity the first team train with, just seeps through the academy, and we can see it. And for me, that's fantastic. The philosophy comes from the top. Eddie Howe's, the success he's had has been sort of unbelievable at the club, and obviously that feeds down into the academy and gives us a great feeling of positivity and belief in the work that we're doing, because we try and replicate as much as possible the intensity that the first team work at. And if you speak to anyone in the first team in the sports science department, they would say, look, the first team manager will drive the intensity, and we're there to back that up and support. And that feeds its way down as well into the academy. Like, we're lucky enough to have coaches that know Eddie Howe really well and know his philosophy, and try and implement that as well. So you're absolutely right. If the coaches weren't on board and weren't sort of taking all the information on board and trying to follow the philosophy that comes from the top, then the intensity wouldn't be there. Because, like you say, we can try and create that intensity from our conditioning drills and from our speed drills and from our strength work and whatever we do. And believe me, we do try and do that. But if we go into our football sessions, like you say, which is the main bulk of what we're going to do, and the intensity is not there, then how much are we going to improve it? Going to be improving, and again, we're in a good position where our coaches are on board with the physical elements of the game, and even if we look at specific drills and there's coaching outcomes that we're looking to get from those drills, there's also physical outcomes that we can look at to improve the players as well. And the coaches, I would suggest that our coaches, as much as us, look for that as well now. They are on board with it, and they won't just look at it from a technical perspective. You'll get our coaches saying, this is the technical drill I want, and I think also we can get this physical aspect in as well. What do you think about that? And half the time I say, do you know what? That's brilliant. Like, you've hit the nail on the head. You know the football. You know the demands of the game. And again, it's the same with any sports in GA. The coaches know the demands of the game. So the sports scientists are there to supplement that, and hopefully to drip things in and feed things in where we can, and be a supportive network. But again, especially at that top end of the academy, getting towards first team level, the intensity needs to be there, and that's driven essentially by the coach.
Yeah, great stuff there, Ben. We got two Bens on the podcast, so I'm going to do my best to navigate to each one. So, Ben Smalley, is there anything that you can add from there, from your experience in terms of the integration stuff and that you've seen at QPR?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the questions I was going to have for Ben, but he sort of answered it anyway, was the emphasis you put on technical coach education, because I think we can all agree that as sports scientists, it's so important to have a good understanding of the game. So I think you touched on that, and you alluded to that before you go out to training, you have that discussion. I think it's so important that the technical coaches actually know the importance of what we do and why we do it. So for example, when we approach that high-speed running day, why we do it and the metrics we need, etc. So you alluded to that fantastically. I actually had one question.
Yeah.
when you're targeting those physical outcomes, what do you do when you don't get them in a given session?
So generally we have live GPS for our older age groups. So if we're looking normally sort of sometimes 15, our 15, 16s were one group this season, so they had live GPS, 18s live GPS, so anything sort of 15, 16 above the live GPS, so we can do that on the spot, if you like, in terms of certain aspects. So we will do sort of top up drills afterwards. We might do extra drills afterwards. We've even changed drills during drills off the back of the live GPS to try and get some extra physical outcomes from them. Not very often, because it's obviously quite hard to do during drills, but there has been occasions where we've sort of, we're doing sort of 4 blocks of 4 minutes with a bit of rest in between, sort of 2-3 minutes rest in between each block, and we've been able to look at the GPS, the live GPS, and say, look, this person's not getting the required physical outcome. We need to add something into this drill for them, and that's worked. Sometimes it hasn't, but sometimes it has. But like I say, yeah, live GPS really helps with the older age groups in that sense. If there's stuff we've missed later on, and we see that from the GPS reports afterwards, then we could potentially add that in the next day. So if we're on a Tuesday, for example, our big loading days are Tuesday and Wednesday, sort of PDP wise or 18s wise especially, then potentially we can add that in on the Wednesday. If the Tuesday we've missed something, if we then miss something on the Wednesday, it might be that it's too late to add that in for the rest of the week. Potentially, depending on what it is, we could get a few more sort of micro dosing bits in on a Friday, obviously with game prep on Friday. But yeah, essentially we'll just make sure we note those things. If we can do it the next day, we will. If we can't, then it might be something we look to push the week after, or even post game on the Saturday, depending on minutes for each individual. We definitely do a lot of work post game with our PDP boys, depending on the match minutes they've had, even if they've played 4 minutes, but we feel they haven't hit physical markers, we'll tend to do some physical work after the game with them if needed, some strength work after the game if needed, if they haven't played a full game or they played limited minutes. Depending on numbers as well, we might do extra conditioning after games, small study games, that sort of stuff on a Saturday. But again, that depends on whether we're at home, whether we're away. The boys know when we're on away games, the measuring wheel comes with us, and some of the strength equipment comes with us. So the boys understand that they're there to hit certain physical markers, and we'll try and produce those as much as we can. Because essentially we're even on game day, we're still looking at development. Yes, we want the PDP boys to play well. We want them to win. But at the end of the day, we're still looking at development. And if we're not hitting our physical targets during the week, and they're capable and can do it post game, depending on how long they've played and the week they've had, then we might look to hit those markers then as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Cheers for that.
Cheers, Ben. Really good stuff there, both of you. Interesting one, Ben, about the after the games, because traditionally in football, everyone's just done the box-to-box runs, or where you've kind of hit a bit of high-speed running, a bit of aerobic work. But actually, maybe like having an opportunity for those who haven't played much to get a real neurological session in, where max speed work and, like you said, strength work in. Something we haven't really done at QPR. How's the strength stuff gone? Have you found it quite beneficial?
Yeah, it's been really good for us. So my thinking a lot, because again, like you just said, the usual box to box or a few runs, and people then go in. And at first team level, I know how difficult it would be to get first team players to do the sort of things I'm talking about. But when we're talking about development players, it's something we can really sort of nail and hone in on, because essentially we're still trying to develop them. They're not seasoned pros. They don't have 100, 200, 300 first team games under their belt. They're players that need to sort of to get to that level. So we definitely have used it a lot, especially if we're at home. So and especially when we've got a big squad. So depending on what we've got. So you've got 5 subs, for example. So, you know, those 5 subs, they might get on, they might not. They might get on for limited minutes. You've got 5 players straight away that need some extra technical, tactical, and conditioning work after the game. And like you say, traditionally it's been a physical thing. It's been right. You know, you didn't play enough minutes, so the sports science should go and run that player. But really, they've missed out on technical work as well, and tactical work. So we have been big. And again, the coaches, our under-18 coach, especially Alan Connell's fantastic with it. You know, he'll back us in what we want to do, and he wants to be involved as much as possible as well. So we've had a lot of sessions in the past season and the season before after games where, you know, we've had players, the 5 subs plus the players that, you know, haven't been in the squad. If they haven't had a training session already, we'll join in and we'll do some max speed work, we'll do some high speed running work, we'll do some technical, they'll do small sided games. They'll do, and like I say, they'll do strength work as well. So we have limited resources pitch side, but we'll always have certain bits and pieces there. So we'll have some weight plates, we might have the sled there, we might have 1 or 2 bars, but we'll have enough to be able to get a simple lower body session into the boys, you know, a squat, a lunge pattern, a hip hinge pattern, some plyos, which leads quite nicely into, you know, a small-sided game and high-speed running hit. So just again, digressing, but I think it's quite a nice subject. It's not uncommon for our players to sort of come off the pitch and do sort of a 20-minute sort of strength blast, 15-20 minutes where they hit those patterns that I've just described. And then we'll also do some technical drills, and they'll go into a small-sided game, maybe 4v4, sort of, you know, 4-minute block. Then they'll go into some maximum aerobic speed runs after that. So you're getting your short, sharp strength work. Then they get in their sort of longer, high-speed running work, and we might do 3 or 4 sets of that. You know, small-sided game, high-speed run, rest. Small-sided game, high-speed run, rest. And hopefully, again, and we've seen from the GPS, we're probably not hitting enough as many sort of XL decels as you would do during a 90-minute game, but we are making a dent into that number and getting them a decent amount and decent exposure to that. And as we know, we can hit the high-speed running numbers from a game quite comfortably afterwards. And we've got the live GPS to make sure we're not sort of underloading or overloading in that sense post-game. So yeah, again, I'm sure there's plenty of good work going on up and down the country and around the world in that sense, but something I feel like there could be a little bit more done with, for sure.
Sounds like really good stuff. I wouldn't want to be a sub at Bournemouth. You end up working harder than the guys that are playing. See what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you what, the boy. Yeah, no, you're right. Some of them takes a bit of getting used to for a few of them.
For sure.
We've had boys come from clubs and say, look, we don't do this after games. I say, hang on a minute, you know, playing a 90-minute game, you'd have hit 11.5k, you'd have hit 800 meters high speed running, 450 XLs and decels, and at the moment you're nowhere near it. So, you know, we can get that stimulus into you still. Then you can have your recovery on the Sunday, and we can go into our technical work on the Monday, and you're sort of hopefully on some sort of level playing field with the boys that have got 90 minutes.
Yeah, really good stuff, Ben. I think I think there probably is some good work going on up and down the country, but I don't think there'll be loads of it. So I think that's an area that maybe as industry we can improve on. Just thinking up ahead, you could even from a development point of view have certain players who need to work on certain part of their individual programs. So some might just work on speed work if that's their limitation, might be technical football work if that's their window of opportunity. There's loads of stuff you could go into there.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking out loud, so ignore me now. But let's move on to the next topic, which I know you're fairly passionate about, and we've had some good conversations, or just setting up some games really amongst the clubs around the growth and maturation stuff, and it's stuff that you guys are notoriously doing really well, and it's out there publicly. We just to give an indication to the guys that are listening, some are coaches, some are sports science. What is growth and maturation? And do you want to just talk a little bit generically about it, about your club and processes and the stuff you do?
Yeah, so obviously it's a big part of individualising the programme for our young players. So having a sort of framework for how they develop across their time with us is really important. And as we know, if we look at sort of foundation phase players and how we come up with the programme for them, especially it comes down to sort of the systems that and the way the body grows and develops over time. So so if we start with the neurological system, the develops really quickly in young children. Obviously, they go from being born to, you know, sitting up, to crawling, to walking, to running, to jumping, and all those things really happen quite quickly. And that's a sign of how quickly sort of the neurological system develops. And that's a part of our program that we work quite hard on in the foundation phase, in terms of getting those movement patterns and movement competencies in, and giving them as many varied experiences again of movement, and getting those neural pathways developed early ages. We know that develops really quickly. So that builds our foundation phase program, our multi-sports, our movement competency frameworks and stuff, and then into sort of the YDP, where that adolescent growth spurt happens. So on average for boys, it's around 13.8 years of age, roughly around that time. But we know it's not generic, and everyone doesn't have their growth spurt at the same time. So what we're looking at is identifying those periods of when boys are going through their growth spurt, and making sure us and the coaches are aware of that, and potentially the boys themselves are aware of that, and educate them what that might mean. The main thing we look at is trying to identify whether players are early maturers, on-time maturers, or late maturers, because that will have a massive impact on the program that they have. It will have a massive impact on the way they perform during games. And obviously I'm putting this in really simple terms, but as you go through that adolescent growth spurt, the body obviously goes through puberty, goes through lots of changes, and with those changes comes some physiological adaptation and hormonal development. So we're looking at increased strength and power post growth spurt, increased endurance, you know, faster sprint speed, increased agility. We're looking at shifts to more of an anaerobic metabolism, so increasing their high-speed running capacities, and really all those things that come with being post-growth spurt or circa or post-growth spurt, when they're applied to sport in general, definitely give players a physical advantage. So in terms of comparing an early maturer to a late maturer, you've got someone who has those increased strength and power capabilities, increased endurance and sprint speed, and those things I just discussed, compared to someone who hasn't gone through that growth spurt and doesn't have those things, or hasn't quite developed those abilities to that sort of level yet. So you're looking at maybe potentially an under 13 or an under 14 age group, and you've got 18 players that are all developing at a different stage, and all going through their adolescent growth spurt at a different stage. And we need to cater for that, because you've got certain players that play in the same positions being compared to each other, that from a physical perspective are just worlds apart. So you could have a central midfield player, an under 14, who's an early maturer, and another central midfield player who's a late maturer, and having the increased, you know, physical abilities to run up and down the pitch, to, you know, move more sharply, move quicker, to be quicker to the ball, to be stronger, more powerful, to jump higher, to, you know, be stronger in 1v1 situations, essentially will make that player stand out as the better central midfield player. But what we might not understand is the later maturer might not have those physical qualities quite yet, but he will get there in the future. That adolescent growth spurt will happen for him, and those increases in the hormonal development will happen, and again they will benefit from those increased strength and power and endurance attributes. So it's a case of making sure we know where players are. So again, if we're talking about integration, coaches need to know that, recruitment staff need to know that, need to have a working knowledge of the difference between that under 14 that's an early and that under 14 that's a late maturer, and how we can sort of, you know, use their individual program to make sure that they're getting the sufficient technical, tactical, psych and physical demands. Now, from a sports science perspective, we know that post growth spurt we can start to really home in on the strength and power stuff. You know, we're hopefully going to see lots more increases in endurance, so we can sort of really test those boys where the late maturers haven't sort of had that development, and we're probably not expecting to see quite such rapid increases in their physical performance. But as long as we understand that, then we're in a good place, and we can make sure everyone's on-field programs and gym programs are essentially tailored to them. In terms of players playing up, playing down, you know, it's always a consideration, the technical, tactical stuff, but also the physical. If we look at early maturers that have got those physical gains, it might be that from a physical perspective, that under 14 age group is too easy, and they need to be stretched physically. So it might be that, yes, we speak to the coaches and say, look, this guy from a physical perspective is more like an under 15 or an under 16 even, and they could be pushed physically to go and train with the 15s and 16s, and the coaches will obviously decide whether technically and tactically that they're ready for that. But even if they're not, it might be a case that we chuck them in there and see how they get on physically, because that will give them an extra opportunity to work on their technical and tactical skills. We see lots of early maturers who rely on that physicality too much to dominate games at their own age group, and they really don't use their technical and tactical ability, and that doesn't develop as quickly as we'd like it to, because they're not working on it. They're not being challenged in that area. So we might push them up into under 15s for them to have that challenge from a physical perspective. And once that physical challenge is harder, they will need to work on their technical and tactical aspects. And it's the same with a late maturer. We might drop them down an age group so they can, the physical disadvantage for them might not be there. They might be more physically matched with their peers. They might receive the ball more. They might, get on the ball, be able to dribble more, be able to have more shots more, and have a bit more of an influence in the game, as well as leadership roles. And we've seen that in the past. And I guess that's where the biobanding stuff's been born out of. We've been biobanding for sort of probably 5 years now in the training and game environment, where we're looking to physically match our players more fairly in order for us to get extra physical, yes, but technical, tactical, and psychological gains as well. There's obviously the growth, injury risk aspect as well that we've researched, and David Johnson's researched quite a lot in the club. So we've had some work out on that. So yeah, just lots to talk about, lots to get involved with, and lots of opportunities to tailor your programs individually for players in that way.
Some great info in there, Ben. You're covering loads of different questions all in one answer. So
I'm trying my best.
No, please do. Just on that then, so there's a bit more detail around the biobanding. Could you maybe give an indication on the processes? So how do you determine the biobands and go through the measurement processes, etc., and then maybe how often then you bioband, etc., in terms of training and games?
Yeah, so obviously we take the measurements every 3 months of our players. So we use the Kramers-Roche equations to work out our biobands. So basically we've got, like I said before, we use the early, on time and late. But when it comes to biobanding, we band players using the Kramers-Roche equations in order for us to get a predicted adult height for our players. So obviously we've got their current height, we take their sitting height, weight. We've got some equations as well built into the PMA system, which is the Premier League system we use, that look into parents' heights as well. That they form part of the equation that goes into that. And basically the system spits out for us everyone's predicted adult heights. And as we have their current heights, we then get a current percentage of predicted adult height for all of our players. And that becomes their sort of index of maturation, if you like. And you can assume that the higher the percentage, the more mature the player, and the closer to obviously 100% they are, then the closer they are to their adult stature. So that's how we work it out in terms of getting their predicted adult heights. And then if we look at each band specifically, we've got certain areas where we want to target. So traditionally we've used sort of 80 to 85% of predicted adult height as a bioband, 86 to 90 and 91 to 95. So we start at the tops of the 91 to 95% will be your players that are sort of ending sort of circa and moving in towards post-growth spurt. So we're trying to match those players that are post-growth spurt or coming towards being at the end of their growth spurt in order for them to be physically matched more. So that might mean having some under 14s, under 15s, under 16s all in the same bioband, but essentially we've matched them from a biological perspective in that way. And like I say, you've got your younger players, which are your early maturers in that band, which will need that extra physical challenge that playing with sort of under 15s potentially might bring them. You might also have an under 16, under 15 that might be in the middle band there, in the sort of 86 to 90%, where again, those are more players that are pre-growth spurt or just coming into their growth spurts. They probably haven't had the sort of physiological advantages yet, so they're coming into that growth spurt. So again, more fairly matched, and obviously we're matching them around sort of 5% bands. And then before that, we've got your sort of 80 to 85%, which are still essentially still boys. They're not near to that growth spurt period yet, and none of them will have that physiological advantage of the extra speed, strength, or the hormonal responses that will bring. So that's how we've traditionally split them in the training environment, in the game environment we've had previously. We've looked into the percentages, so obviously there's still variation in that band, so there's a 5% variation. So you might have someone, for example, that's 91 playing against someone that's 95% of their predicted adult height, and essentially we're never going to get everyone that's the same percentage playing against each other, because we wouldn't have enough players to do a training session or field a game. So realistically, you have to have bands large enough to be able to put a session or a game on. So there's one of the considerations we need to look into. But what we have done there is reduce that percentage band to 5%, where we've seen, you know, upwards of sort of 14, 15% of variation between sort of one group, maybe your under 14s or your under 13s group, or whatever group it may be. So we might have reduced, you know, from 14% of physical maturation down to 5, in order for it to be a lot more of a physically matched playing field. Now, again, there's also psychological elements to it. There's technical elements to it. There's tactical elements to it. But we've done a lot of research into it. We've had a study published. We've hopefully got some more stuff in the pipeline. And the feedback we've got from the players themselves has been really good, really nice. We've tried to educate them along the way as much as we can, and they're telling us, essentially, most of them are telling us they understand it. And if not, then we're implementing some more education, which we do consistently across the board anyway. They're telling us they enjoy biobanding, they like the different challenge. Again, it goes back to that variety I spoke about at the beginning. And we're getting a lot of good feedback from them. So in terms of our early maturers, playing potentially with older players and getting a more of a physical challenge and more of a technical challenge as well, which is what we really, really need for those guys. The later maturers are getting a less of a physical challenge, and sometimes a similar technical challenge, potentially maybe less of a technical challenge at times, because they're playing with younger players. But what they do get out of that is increased learning opportunities. So they're telling us they're getting on the ball more, they're dribbling more, they're passing more, they're having more of an influence on the game. And really, something we didn't expect at the beginning was the psychological aspects. Because these late maturers, we expected the psychological side of it to be a little bit negative for them, playing with younger players, being seen as sort of older players and maybe playing down, which obviously isn't the case, but that's the way we thought they might see it. And some potentially do, so that's consideration. But also some are telling us that they thrive in it because it allows them to be the leader for a change. It allows them to be the one that's driving the session, allows them to be the one that takes a younger player under their wing and gives them a bit of advice and gives them, you know, a role model to follow. So we're really seeing some real good feedback from our players in terms of their perceptions of biobanding, which has been great. And we're looking again now into some more objective markers. So we're doing some stuff with the analysis department around technical and tactical markers, or KPIs, if you like, between the differences between chronological and biological games. And one specific study we're sort of trying to write up at the moment is around the early and late maturers playing in chronological games. So we found our preliminary analysis, and I spoke about it on the Football Fitness Federation podcast, I think, as well, where early maturing players in the chronological age group games are getting more minutes. They're also providing more goals and assists in those games from an attacking perspective, and also from sort of a defensive perspective, they're having more of an impact on the game when we look at our KPIs in terms of tackles and interceptions and bits and pieces like that. But the real important bit of that is obviously the analysts and the coaches need to understand there are reasons that are behind that, and it's not just because these players are our golden players and they're the ones we need to concentrate on. It's because they have those physical advantages. And again, there's still work to do in terms of education and again across the board in terms of coaches and recruitment. We're trying to do that all the time to try and make sure everyone's aware of these things, and we're not just putting all our eggs in one basket with the early maturing players, which is something that has happened a lot in the past and still happens in our academy and academies up and down the country. So lots of education around it for all departments. Again, I'll come back to integration, and everyone needs to understand their role. So like I've just mentioned there, sports science, coaching, recruitment, analysis, and every other, psychology. So again, everyone's got a role to play in growth and maturation, and everyone's got a role to play in bioband and how it can potentially benefit our boys.
Perfect, thanks Ben. And some things that come out of there is, I think initially everyone thinks it's going to help the late developers by giving them a fairer opportunity to practice things that they might not be able to practice when you're playing against stronger players. But actually it's the early developers that maybe don't get challenged enough in the initial years of learning, and they go through 4 years of coasting essentially because they're physically too strong for everyone, and they might be the ones at the end of it that actually miss out on a career because they wasn't coached in the right way. So it hits the two ends of the spectrum really nicely, doesn't it?
It does. You're absolutely right. The early maturers are key, because the amount of times you see players go through an academy and dominate their age groups, get to sort of under 16s and then get released, or get to 18s and all of a sudden they're not the sort of force they were, and they get released at the end of their scholarship. It happens all the time. I've seen it time and time again. And it's potentially one of the reasons might be because they haven't been challenged enough throughout the age groups in terms of, they've relied on that physical prowess to get them through games, to score goals, to be faster, to be quicker, to be stronger, and the technical and tactical aspects just haven't followed. Whereas, if you can get a late maturer through the system and keep them in as long as possible, they've had that challenge the whole way through of being less mature and less physically capable. So they've had to really, really rely on technical and tactical. Mm-hmm. So they've probably spent more time relying on their technical and tactical skills than the early maturer throughout, the YDP years. And eventually they get to a point where that increase in hormonal development does happen, and they do get, that extra strength and power and speed. So if you can keep your early maturing players in, as long as they're good enough, you're not keeping them in for the sake of just because they're an early maturer. If we can nurture them through, you'll probably find that by the time you get to sort of 19, 20 years old, a late maturer is going to potentially be your best bet.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I spoke to Rich Clark a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about like the differences between a sports scientist and a football and a coach, technical coach, is that the technical coach, and this is massively stereotypical, not all of them, but are more performance driven. So they won't worry too much about the biomechanics, the movement that we're kind of trained to observe. But I guess just them having an understanding that he's an early developer without even biobanding might force the program to be geared around working his technique that he's going to need later on. So I think the education stuff's huge. Last one, Ben, in terms of the growth and maturation, you mentioned it about the peak height velocity. What sort of things are you looking for from an injury perspective when players go through that peak height velocity? Is there any markers you're looking for to say they might be at more risk? And if so, what kind of happens to their program then? Do you modify their program in terms of the team?
Yeah, so yes, it's a great question, and lots of stuff's being done on it in our academy at the moment. Like I mentioned, David Johnson before, who's doing his 9 to 16 sports sciences with us, and he's doing his PhD in growth and maturation, specifically injury at Bath University. So we're big on it. We obviously, like I say, we measure every 3 months, and David does a great job of tracking all the YDP players every 3 months across that period. And we're looking for when they get into that growth period, that sort of, that growth, adolescent growth spurt. So the injury risk period between 88 and 92% is when we traditionally see that increase in risk, which comes with that increase in rapid growth. So we're looking for them getting towards that period, and all of our players will then be reported on back to their coaches every 3 months in terms of where they are on that curve, what we need to look out for. what we need to look out for across there. So yeah, I mean, rapid increases in height obviously is a flag. There's been lots of studies around 7 centimeters per year is a flag for increased injury risk and stuff like that. But David's doing a lot of work on not just using specific or generic markers like that, just looking into it specifically, but any sort of rapid growth gets reported back to the coaches. Any sort of rapid growth in terms of leg length might be a marker as well. And I don't know if you've seen the study that David's done between the interaction between training load, volume growth, and maturation in adolescent football players, but it was something that we had published, or David had published last year in association with Bath and the academy and the staff here. So that looked into obviously training volume growth and maturation, and we found there was a significant relationship between growth rate and injury incidence, which might be obvious, but we also saw a significant relationship between maturity status and injury incidence, and a significant linear relationship between week-to-week changes in training volume and injury incidence as well. So not only the markers of growth and maturation, they're definitely there, and they're definitely what we report back to our coaches on, but also we're looking a bit further into the interaction as well between that growth and maturation, training volume, and how that works. So yeah, there's lots going on, especially in that sector. And for us, again, it comes back to individualization of program and education of everyone. So like I say, the reports go back every 3 months to the coaches, and their training program specifically won't change if there's no signs that they're struggling. So we might have players that are growing rapidly, but it won't affect everyone in the same way. So we don't really want to be taking players out of training or taking any of the time away from their development unnecessarily. But if we do see those markers, and we do see, and players complain of sort of certain pain, so knee pain, for example, they might have an onset of Osgood's maybe. A program might look a little bit different for them. We've got a protocol for just for that in terms of Osgood Schlatters. So we do with our YDP players futsal every Wednesday evening, which is obviously a court sport, so it's obviously a harder surface. So we found that that's sort of an inflammatory thing, or it gives an inflammatory response to Osgood's and people that are going through that period. So something for us might be that we take them away from their futsal session and do some low-level work in the gym, some coordination-based stuff, some strength work maybe, monitor them more closely. Again, we only do these things if we feel there's a real need for it. But if they were in what we would call stage 1, which would be a bit of pain and potential onset of Osgood's, then we would do those things. We would probably decrease their XL cells with plyometric load where possible. So we probably wouldn't take anything away from the training, but any extra plyos and XL cell that was planned for them that week or in that period, we would probably reduce. And they would see the medical department at least once a week for some massage and for a bit of an update. If someone was a little bit more have a little bit more trouble with growth-related injuries, then there'd be what we class as stage 2, which would be sort of as I just described, but we'd also do some extra hammy and glute strength work with them, and potentially some sort of biomechanical assessment. And if it got to a stage where they were struggling to complete training or games, then we would limit that game time or training time to make sure that they can stay into training and games without having a period of dropping out. But we would just reduce that load just to make sure we can monitor it slowly across that time. And if we had anyone that sort of was severely suffering from growth-related injuries, that they would be classed as a stage 3. So again, as above everything, we would do the same protocol, but they would report to the medical department twice a week. We'd continue with S&C and the coordination-based stuff, but we would potentially take them off their feet, and we would reduce their training load quite significantly, and do some sort of off-feet conditioning in terms of bike work, swimming work, that sort of stuff. And this is sort of monitored week to week, and when symptoms reduce and and they sort of start feeling a little bit better, then we'll gradually integrate them back into their full training program. So we've got a systematic way of working with growth injuries. But like I said before, we try and look out for those markers beforehand to see if we're getting anywhere close to someone developing a growth-related injury. And the physio, sports therapists, along with obviously myself and David, as I've discussed, that have done a lot of work in this area in the sort of past few years and continue to do so, because we're not there yet. We're not eradicating growth injuries through the YDP and through the Ellison growth spurt time. So we're just monitoring that, and obviously David's PhD has helped us have a little bit more focus on that as well. So again, everyone's on board in terms of sports science and medical, and everyone's on board in terms of coaching. Obviously, they have questions about what players can and can't do, and obviously we're happy to give them the knowledge. But we're lucky, and I feel grateful that we've got coaches that understand and will buy into what we're doing. And you know, again, we hear stories about clubs where they say they can either train or they can't train, one or the other. And we're sort of the other end of the scale, where we'll sort of dip players in and out where needs be, and that goes for rehab as well. You know, we'll get the players before they're ready to go into to full training. That they'll do work with the coaches and from a technical perspective, separately from that. And again, that's not just full time, that's schoolboys as well. So again, real integration across the board. But like I say, we're doing a lot of work, and it's developed quite nicely over the last few years. But you know, we're still not there, and there's still lots to learn and lots to be getting on with.
Yeah, some great stuff in there, Ben. Similarly, at QPR, we have a very similar model in terms of modified training, and players are allowed to dip in and out, which makes complete sense, because otherwise you go from doing one-to-one work with a sports science and see straight into a session. It's kind of a big spike. And I guess the key on that one is with the growth, it's a magic thing that we're trying to look for, isn't it? The fact that they've grown a lot, but also they're at risk. And like you said, a lot of people grow and they're fine to carry on training. So it's just kind of having a consideration of that. Mr. Smalley, is there anything from a growth point of view you want to jump in or add anything to Ben on that perspective?
No, I was going to say it leads quite nicely into the next topic, if you're ready to go on to that, the movement competency framework.
Yeah, please do. Just before we go into that, just a quick one to the members, or those that aren't even members, please head over to the website, www.deelysportscience.com. 20% off membership at the moment. You'll see all the services we got there. Membership is booming in the last few weeks, so the word's starting to get out. So thank you all for your support. And yeah, head over to the website. You'll see a whole plethora of practices from coaching, GA, from football, from sports science, SSC. So please take a look. Yeah, of course, Ben. Let's jump in with the competency stuff and get into that 100%.
Yeah, cool. So, Ben, I wanted to delve more into the movement competency framework. So, really, just first, for our listeners, could you just give a brief breakdown of the framework? So, what it looks at, biomotors and movement skills it addresses, and then we'll go on to sort of how you structure and implement that.
Yeah, we've got a movement competency framework in the academy. Every under 9 to 16 player is on that continuum. Some of the under 18s are still on it as well. So the way that looks is we've got a 5-level program, which has 3 sub-levels as well. So, for example, level 1 will have a beginner level, an intermediate level, and an advanced level. So each level has that. So we're looking at 15 sort of levels across the board, with your 5 and your 3 sort of sub-levels. So in each of those levels, there'll be sort of exercises or movement patterns, however you want to describe it, which are across double leg squat pattern, single leg squat pattern, lunge pattern, double leg hip hinge patterns and single leg hip hinge, pushing and pulling, double leg jumping and landing mechanics, double leg plyos, and also single leg jumping landing mechanics and single leg plyos as well. So those are the essential core movements that are in the program, and each one has a level, obviously beginner, intermediate, advanced level 1, beginner, intermediate, advanced level 2, all the way up to level 5, where we're sort of at your advanced work, which we're hoping our under 16s will be able to sort of tackle, and our under 18s should be working on in their programs as well. And across it as well, you could be at so we would classify each player in a level. So, for example, I might be a level 3 intermediate. Ben, you might be a level 4 intermediate. Ross, you might be a level 5 advanced, for example, but every player will be on there somewhere. But that doesn't mean that they're in sort of every exercise for that category. So, for example, if I'm a level 3 intermediate for my double leg squat pattern, I could be a level 3 beginner for my lunge pattern, but I could be a level 4 beginner for my hinge pattern, for example. But essentially, wherever you mostly fit, that will be the sort of level you're categorized in. For that, so that's the framework. Do you want me to delve a bit deeper into the other bits and how we implement that?
Yeah, so I was mostly really like, my interest is how you really implement that sort of within FP phases with like more prepubescent individuals, but then also how you integrate it within like PDB, so within the microcycle, for example.
Yeah, so if we start with FP, so obviously everyone starts at level 1 anyway, sort of level 1 beginner. So no matter how old they are, they'll start at level 1 beginner. So we had an under 18 that joined us late at the start of the season just gone, who hadn't really come from any sort of strength or movement competency background. So he started at level 1 beginner and worked his way up throughout the season. And again, some people might work their way through it quickly. Some people might take a lot of time to work their way through it. And essentially, if we're talking about FP players, we're not looking to rush them through it. We're looking to, get that real quality work into them. So that their program will form part of their overall physical development. So obviously, a lot of their physical development comes from simply training and small-sided games and the work we do with the coaches. But also, we will provide them with their Movement Competency Framework program, which is their basics program, ASCB Basics is what it's called. So they'll do that every time they're with us. They'll have 10 or 15 minutes pre-training, so they'll do it every time. So they'll get to training. That's essentially one of their arrival activities. The equipment's there for them if they need it. Essentially, a lot of it's sort of obviously unloaded for FP, and they don't need a lot of equipment. Maybe a couple of bands and maybe some balls that we use for doing sort of ball pulls and stuff like that. But anything they need will be there, some dowels potentially. And they'll just crack on with that. They know their program, they know that they're supposed to do it. So there'll be sports science or coaching staff around to monitor. But we're in a place now where we've been doing it for a few years, and the boys come in and they crack on with it without even being told, which is fantastic. So they'll do that for 10 or 15 minutes on a Tuesday night before they go into their training session. Same on a Thursday. On a Wednesday, they come in to the futsal hall and they'll have a futsal session, but they'll also have an S&C session as well, where we'll then take that into the gym and coach them a little bit more around it. So we probably get 15 to 20 minutes with them to do that in the gym setting. We also play a lot of games and wrestling games and bits and pieces and stuff in there with them to make sure that it's staying nice and fun, and we can get some of these movement patterns in them without it being sort of as isolated as we can, as well as having to do that isolated stuff to make sure that patterning is there. And on top of that, the second part of their S&C session is always a sort of speed and agility session, obstacle course, that sort of stuff. Week to week, they also do a multi-sport session once a month. So instead of doing futsal and their S&C, they'll do multi-sports. And this season's been really beneficial for us. Sort of that's 9 to 12s in FP. So they'll do that one a month session multi-sports wise, and we've been able to get multi-sport coaches in as well this season. So we've had gymnastics coaches in, we've had boxing coaches in, we've had handball, we've had all sorts. We've had volleyball, we've done sort of short tennis games, we've done badminton, basketball, you name it, we've done it. Even stuff down to just, letting them run free obstacle courses, that sort of stuff. So that's how we structure our FP program. Getting them to do the basics program has been pretty easy. They're quite receptive. They're always wanting to improve. Telling them what level they're on makes them want to move up levels, obviously. So that for them is a little carrot and something to dangle in front of them. If you can show me that you can do your lunge pattern nicely over the next couple of weeks, we might get you onto level 1 intermediate or level 1 advanced, and kids at that age just gobble that up. So they're all happy to crack on with it, and we just make sure we get all of the fun elements in as well while we go, and going back to their sort of Tuesday and Thursday night, we do lots of running mechanic stuff as well post. doing their basics session. So that's how it looks from the FP perspective. If we move into wide EP, it gets a little bit more structured in terms of day release starts at under 13s. So they're in the gym with us. 13s and 14s are in the gym with us once a week. 15s and 16s last season were in the gym with us twice a week. They were sort of one group essentially, so they were in the gym with us twice a week. And they'll have their, same as FP, they'll have their basics programs. They'll have an on-field version of it, and they'll have a gym version of it as well, so a loaded version. So pre-training, they'll do their on-field version, which is unloaded or minimally loaded, but we'll try and make the movements more complex. And that, for me, again, is a really nice introduction to the session. So they come in, they get on with their basics work. Like I say, they've got any equipment they need there ready and waiting for them. Becomes their movement competency work for that session. Becomes a mini prehab, becomes a mini warm-up, the first part of their warm-up, which leads them straight into being able to do some running mechanics work or whatever work we've got for them from a physical perspective on that specific day. So that works for them on a Tuesday and a Thursday, essentially. 13s and 14s wise. 15s and 16s will be in day release on a Wednesday. And they'll be in the gym. They'll be on their loaded versions of their program. So again, that might be tailored a little bit more individually in terms of exercises that they need, or if there's anything they need to work on. But essentially, their program's based off the framework, and we'll get them loaded in the gym if they're ready for it. Essentially, again, the question that comes up a lot: when do you load? Why do you load? That sort of stuff. So for us, having the framework allows us to have a systematic approach to getting them into where they are capable of loading. So we know that they can do certain movements unloaded. We know that they're at a decent enough level, and then we'll start loading them, low-level loads in terms of a goblet squat or a med ball squat, and then moving into sort of a training bar front squat or a training bar back squat, and start sort of moving through to sort of weighted front squats and banded overhead squats, that sort of stuff. Just challenging those movements in that way with light loads before we then load them even more as they move through if they need it, and especially after that adolescent growth spurt where we know they should be ready to start increasing their strength levels a lot more. So yeah, our 15s and 16s have that on a Wednesday. They essentially have a Monday night session as well with us. So they come in to do some extra technical work on a Monday night, and we've managed to add in some prehab work and a gym session to introduce them to some more sort of upper body stuff as well, and stability work on a Monday night, obviously because they would have played at the weekend, so a little bit more low level. But again, anyone that hasn't played at the weekend, or hasn't got a great amount of minutes or needs to do some extra S&C work has a chance to do that on a Monday night as well with the S&C coach. So that's how it works for them. Our 13s and 14s will have a similar gym session on day release on the Thursday. And then when we go into our 18s program, they're in twice a week in the gym. They're in Tuesday and Wednesdays. With us, there are 2 loading days, so we load on the pitch and in the gym on the same days. And their programs will be more your sort of typical top end programs leading into your first team program. So what they would be expected to do in the first team, and we'll really try to iron out their sort of strength work in there, get the strength stimulus into them, get their plyo stimulus into them, and for me a really important part of that is increasing their sort of reactive abilities and looking into their RSI scores and how they come about, and where we need to improve them, whether it be their starting strength, elastic strength, however you want to call it, whichever sort of part of the continuum where they're strong, where they're weak, where we can sort of make gains. So again, really focused on the individual, really focused on their needs, and hopefully they get the best out of the sessions that we provide. But essentially what we needed was a systematic framework for players to work through, and for us to know that our whichever age group the S&C or the medical staff are working with, we know there's a process by where they move through those levels, and we can develop them in that process. And obviously each of the movement competencies has a specific way of developing the complexity of the movement as we go through the load, and that sort of stuff as well.
Oh, Ben, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Perfect, great stuff, Ben. Just a couple of me on those stuff. So in terms of when they go and do their basics, essentially, I know this term gets bandied around and pre-ad is, I know you spoke about it on the Football Fitness Federation. Actually, the biggest injury prevention is good training and making sure they're hitting, across the normal training week, good basics and stuff like that. Does that essentially replace that then, this basics? Would that then be there, so for the full-time boys, or would there be additional stuff added on top of that as well?
So for the younger boys, that's basically what that is. So like I said before, that becomes their pre-act, if you like, their prehab, if you want to call it that. Basically part of their weekly program. Mm-hmm. So like you alluded to, we look at their program as a whole, being their route to development, and that takes into consideration injury prevention, performance development, robustness, which is another word we discussed before. But again, that essentially becomes that for them. And when we get towards the top end, sort of 15, 16s, they get supplementary work on top of that as well, based off of, screening and the stuff we think they need to do. For the 18s, they'll have tailored sort of pre-training sessions, prehab, if you want to call it that will be catered towards what they're doing when they go into the session as well. So if we're doing strength sessions, to be fair, we do our specifically if we talk about the 18s, we do our S&C sessions before training. That's just the way it is, which again is an interesting topic, but it's something that we've been used to for a long time, and the boys are fine with. So essentially, when we do our lower body strength session on a Tuesday, that's before training, so there's no point in us going back and trying to pre-activate boys that are already activated, for example. So they'll go straight into they'll have a warm-up and conditioning element to it, but they'll go straight in without any sort of pre-act, if you like. But the other days they'll have those pre-training sessions that are geared towards targeting certain aspects, but also towards what they've got coming up in the warm-up and the rest of the session. So if it's a speed-based session, they'll do some faster movements in their pre-activation. They'll do some we'll do some hip work. We'll do some knee work, some ankle work, some foot work potentially. That will move in towards that session. So it is essentially a prehab, but it also works towards the session that we're working on as a whole. Despite that there might be certain individual things in there that players need to work on at the medical department to see fit.
Perfect. I think the one about the strength training before football training, that's a podcast in itself, I think. So we'd have to get you back on and discuss that separately. Some really good stuff there. Ben, we've taken up so much of your time. I've got a couple of closing questions to go through, and then we'll let you go. A general one that I spoke about with a few people is around like sports scientists, S&C coaches, like who have played the game, and those that haven't played the game will then transfer into different sports. What's your take on that? Do you think those personnel, obviously there's so many factors to go into that, but do you think those personnel have like a greater knowledge on applying those like fundamental principles to the game, or not? Do you not think it matters either way whether they've played that sport at a reasonable level or not?
I think you can have both, if I'm honest. I think for a sports scientist, for me, for example, so I feel like I've got a good knowledge of the game, how it's played. I played at county standard back in Sussex, in Brighton and Sussex, Sussex County League, where I was born and brought up. And I've loved football. I've watched football all my life. I feel like I've got a good handle on aspects of it. Obviously, someone who's had a professional career will have potentially an even better view of how the game is played, the demands of the game. They've been through it, which could be a real asset, in my opinion. It could be a real asset as long as they also have the knowledge to back that up, and also and potentially don't just look at it from a player's perspective. It's the same with coaching. Coaches, a great player doesn't always make a great coach. It can, for sure. But you don't have to have been a great player to be a great coach, and you don't have to have been a great player to be a great sports scientist. I think we need a blend of the two. I think you need to be, you need to have that background knowledge. You need to be forward thinking. You need to be open. Those are the main things I see as being great qualities, as well as being able to have a real good handle and knowledge of the game. I think for me, whatever sport you're in, if you don't have a fundamental knowledge of the game and the demands and you can't put yourself in those situations, then you're probably missing a trick. But at the same token, you don't have to have played, Premier League football to be a Premier League sports scientist, and you don't have to have played Premier League football to be a Premier League manager. And we've seen many examples of great managers that haven't, made it at the top level for sure. But again, I think it comes down to the person and how they use their attributes and their skills. You can have a sports scientist that's had a career and be brilliant, and a sports scientist that had a career and be terrible, and you can have a sports scientist the other way around that hasn't had a career and be great, and hasn't had a career and be rubbish as well. So for me, it's all about the skills you've got to apply your and your ability to apply them to the job role. And for me, there's plenty of great sports scientists out there, and anyone trying to get into sports science, whether it be from an academic background or a sports background or a professional football background or any other sport, has got lots of good role models and examples out there to sort of steal bits from and then move forward and make it your own. So great question, something I wasn't expecting, but I think hopefully I've given you a good enough answer there.
No, great, really good answer. And it takes me back to when I first went into London Gaelic team, senior county team, about 5 years ago. I hadn't even heard of the sport. I didn't even know the sport existed. So but it did take me a year to really get up to speed and start having a real advisory role on that sport, because I think you still need to understand the nuances and the way the sport and the culture of the sport as well, because sometimes when you're coming in and not knowing it can go either way. Fresh eyes are good. Sometimes though, you need to understand and embed yourself in that culture a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And like I said to you earlier, I've learned lots from coaches along the way. So I would have always said, even at the start of my career, I would have said, yeah, I've got a good handle on football and the demands, and I've played a bit, and I've watched enough, and I've been a football fan enough to know, and I've studied it enough to know. But also speaking to coaches day to day, and their knowledge, and I'm lucky enough to be around a lot of coaches that played the game, and even coaches that haven't played the game but are more knowledgeable than me on it. For me to pick those things up as we go and learn, and I've been able to move my sort of my vision from I'm a sports scientist, and I'm this is how I'm going to condition someone, this is how I'm going to get them strong, towards right, we're going to blend the two, we're going to make sure we can get them strong, we're going to make sure we can make them as conditioned as possible, as fit as possible, as strong, we're going to make sure they can do this, do that, excel, decel. But it needs to be based on what the club wants, what that player needs to do in their position, and how the formation or the playing style needs to work. So we need to make sure we can have a grasp of playing styles and what positional needs are, and what the coaches want, for us to be able to then ensure our players are capable of doing that, and capable of doing it effectively, consistently, without getting injured. So
yeah, 100%. I think the biggest thing that come out of that was being open, both ways. But football coaches, you spoke about being open, but as a sports scientist, like you said, you went into the game thinking, do you know what, I've got a grip on this, but 4 years down the line, actually, I've learned so much more being around these people that my philosophy is always evolving.
Absolutely.
Interesting one with Chris Ramsey. We had him on the podcast about a month ago now, and he said that the physical side, it doesn't matter how fast and strong someone is. If someone can't control a ball, and unfortunately we've had examples of that at QPR, that they're going out the game anyway. So it just puts things in perspective at times that you've got your blinkers on, but like you said, it's the overall approach.
Sure.
Then one last question, and then it's a double-edged one. I don't think this will catch you out, but a bit more about yourself and the department. So great insight to what you're doing at the moment. What's the future? And you can talk about short-term or longer-term goals if you like for the department at Bournemouth. Where do you think it's going in terms of your remit, and where would you like it to go?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a few areas where we need to sort of look at, drill down into, and make sure we're fulfilling. So my role as head of sports science and medicine obviously covers a few disciplines. So for me, yeah, as a sports scientist, I'm keen for us to expand our sports science department and our service. We've got lots of good ideas that I think we could implement better. Potentially with only sort of one more member of staff. So that's something that we're looking for. We're looking to aim to do down in the future at some point. Obviously, the category status will have a big bearing on that, and hopefully the club is pushing forward with a new training ground, which will be unbelievable for us and allow us to do lots more. The gym we use is currently shared with a school, so there's certain things around that where we're looking to get into new training ground eventually when it's finished, for us to be able to push the program on even more in that sense. But if we look a little bit further down the line, we need to support psychology more as an industry, in my opinion. So at the moment in our department, we have a sort of a consultant in terms of psychology. So someone who works at Bournemouth Uni, who's a senior lecturer, PhD in sports psychology. So she's fantastic. Gives us a real good insight. We've also got a PhD student working with us full time from Bournemouth Uni, who's around the club a lot and works with our YDP players on day release and bits and pieces. But for me, it's something that we need to make more of in our department, and I guess across football, I guess across academies up and down the country and around Europe and the world, and potentially even first teams. We speak a lot about it. We put a lot of emphasis on it. Our academy manager is really big on psychology, as is our head of coaching. So there's a real development opportunity there at our academy and across football and across a lot of sport. And obviously that comes down to finances and bits and pieces like that. But essentially, I feel that's where we're going to go. And I really want to push that in my setting as well, at least. In the future, so like I say, we're doing as much as we can at the moment in terms of giving contact to the boys and the coaches, psychological skills. We're trying to embed them in the program, in the training program, but there's still a long way to go, and there's still more that can be done, and more that we can support our players with. So that's the big area. I think we're going to see, no doubt, we're going to see advancements in the technological side of it, and how we assess players, how we quantify load, how we measure certain metrics. Testing wise, I still think there's a lot to do as well. We've done a lot of talking about testing with the staff recently across first team, across the academy, and profiling players and how we test those sort of attributes, and are we really testing the things that we need to be testing. For me, we're still some way away from that. Certain tests that we do, which are good markers for certain isolated physical attributes, but can we sort of stretch the limits to what we're doing and try and work a better program in terms of testing our players, and the transfer of that from training or field into gameplay is something that we need to look into. So lots of nuances, lots of things to look into. But yeah, I think there's still a long way to go. But specifically, I think psychology is probably going to be the next big thing. It's probably where sports science was 10, 15 years ago in terms of getting it into clubs and sports sort of institutions. So yeah, moving forward with that for me will be a big sort of win and a plus for academies, for everyone involved in sport, and the players, especially themselves, and their development.
Fantastic. Ben, really, really grateful for your time, mate. We took up a lot of your time now. I know you've got 3 little ones as well to go and look after. Some great stuff in there for listeners, and some great take-homes for me, and a few things we can bring you back on for a part 2 for sure as well. So from us at Daily Sports Science, thank you very much, Ben. It's been a pleasure. Ben, Mr. Smalley, thank you today for your co-hosting and for joining us. I hope you found it useful.
Yes, thank you, Ross, and thank you, Ben. Fantastic chat.
Brilliant. I enjoy these conversations, guys, anytime.
Perfect. Top man. And just for listeners again, head over to the website and check out our sponsors of the podcast, ript.app, rypt.app, and lots are going to be coming out from the DSS stuff around with those. So guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you in Locker Room Podcast very soon. Thank you.